I'm here up the mountain, which is basically a big hill not far from where I grew up. I spent a lot of time up here when I was a little boy, climbing trees and building dens with my one cousin, and then some mountain biking and hiking with my other cousin and my dad. So yeah, it's a place that I'm very familiar with and comfortable being, at least a lot more so than being at home in front of a screen or talking to a camera. Whoop. This was kind of a magical place for me growing up, and in many ways it still is. It's a place where there's lots of adventure and a chance to kind of disconnect from the busyness of everyday life and kind of just get lost a bit. This is actually where we filmed some of the Zone 2 training video as well that I put out a few months back. Whoop. Since I recorded that video and I put out a blog post a few years before that on Zone 2 training, I've had quite a few questions in the comments and via email. So nice and quiet up here. So I thought I'd head up here with a backpack with a tin of beans, some food, and kind of make a day of it, have a hike and answer some questions on the way. So there's timestamps down below for each question, so feel free to check that out to find what you're looking for. And I encourage you to check out the original Zone 2 training video and blog post if you haven't already, which I will link to down below. So I'm going to get hiking, and I'll speak to you soon. Before I properly get started, I'm filming most of this on the GoPro, most of these talking to the camera shots, so apologies if the audio isn't that great. Hopefully it'll be fine. Yeah, just to let you know. So the most common question I get about Zone 2 training is, what do I do if it feels too slow? So this is common for people who are complete beginners, so you've not really done any endurance training before, but it's also seen with athletes who maybe have a bit of experience as well, but they haven't spent a prolonged time period doing low intensity training. There's a few things to consider. The first would be acceptance. So you're at a stage where you want to be going faster than you currently are. It's completely normal to feel that and to feel like you want to be a few stages ahead, whether that's running a little bit faster or actually running as opposed to walking. But wherever you are on that continuum, there's always going to be somewhat of a drive to go a bit faster. But if we can't kind of find satisfaction with where we are, we're always going to be battling against ourselves. It's okay to strive to get faster and to improve, but that becomes a much more enjoyable process if we can be somewhat satisfied or appreciative of where we are right now in our journey, as opposed to comparing ourselves to others or to where we want to be in the future. So that's kind of the background thing to consider. And then in terms of practical advice, if you are finding that in your Zone 2 heart rate you are essentially just walking, to bridge the gap between running and walking, you could use a weighted vest or a weighted backpack. So that could be literally carrying weights, or kind of like I'm doing today, shove some sandwiches in your backpack, maybe some rocks, whatever, to make it a bit heavier. Just go out for a hike, find some hills, ideally out in nature, but if you live in a city or there's not trails near you, then just around your local environment as well. So it is literally just a case of walking before you run and being patient, and you'll build capacity that way just by adding that extra weight, and also build some of the kind of resilience and structure in your joints before you then up the intensity with running. If you're a runner and you're running in your Zone 2 training, but you're having to stop-start a lot, particularly if there's hills, then I would say try and persevere with that. That does pass. But one thing you can do to kind of assist that is to do some downhill zone 2 repeats. So if you can find a stretch that is kind of ideally 10 minutes or more of slight gradient, so not crazy steep, and perform downhill repeats. You'll run downhill at your zone 2 pace, or zone 2 heart rate, which will likely be at a slightly faster pace than you would be going on the flat. Then when you get to the bottom of the hill, either jog slowly or walk back up, and kind of repeat that 3 or 4 times for a half hour, 45-minute workout. So that's going to get your legs used to turning over at a faster rate and kind of prep you mentally and physically for moving at a slightly faster pace with your standard zone 2 training. So yeah, ultimately with the pace, just be patient and maybe experiment with a few of those suggestions as well. Weighted walk-in and downhill repeats can come in handy. Let's get moving. This is kind of going to be part FAQ, part me just having a nice hike and exploring the mountain. Yeah, hope you enjoy it. Hope it's useful to you. If you have any questions that I missed or you'd like me to cover in another video, then you can let me know down in the comment section below, and I will keep them in mind and try and get back to you if I've got something useful to share. Ooh, there's a steep bit. Concentration phase is needed. Spooky trees. So another common question that I get is, how do I know that zone 2 training is working? So if you're running, the primary measure for how effectively your zone 2 training is working is whether or not your pace per mile or per kilometer is getting faster. So you may be gone from 8-minute kilometers down to 7:30 or 7 minutes. So we'd look to see this maybe week to week, but more likely month to month, over several weeks, several months, that kind of time frame. So you can track this more accurately if you use a kind of a track, like an Olympic athletics track. So you might do like a 5k or a 3k run on there and then test it every few months, or you could just kind of keep tabs on your average pace during your standard runs. So the general idea is you're building your aerobic capacity and you should be able to work at a faster pace or a slightly higher intensity while placing less stress on your body, or without placing an increased stress on your body cardiovascular system. You might also notice a lowering of your resting heart rate. That's quite common, commonly reported, and people also report often that they feel less fatigue, feel more energy during everyday activities, and also in their kind of other training and other sports and activities, even if they are performed at a higher intensity. So you've now built a more solid base. So anything that you perform on top of that, you've raised that level a little bit. So you can perform things that are typically higher intensity without asking as much of your body and dipping into kind of that anaerobic zone as much, if that makes sense. Add-on question from that: how long does it take to see improvements? It really depends. It depends on what sort of training background you have, how frequently you're training, what other training you're doing, and how much stress is in your life, how well you're sleeping and recovering. There's so many different factors, it's really hard to give a prescriptive answer. Some people see improvement session to session. You might see that if you're a complete beginner, but I'd say for most people it's more of kind of a gradual process where you might not see any improvements for a few sessions, you might get a little bit slower, and then all of a sudden you knock 10 or 15 seconds off your average per kilometer pace. So it'll kind of plateau a bit and then jump. So it's not a linear process for most people, at least not for me. So it's just a case of, again, being patient and making sure you're doing all the things to support improvements and kind of help you recover from your training. So sleeping well, eating well, managing stress, trying not to overtrain, all those sorts of things. Oh, bless me. I'm gonna tuck in and have some lunch now and then head up over the top of the mountain and try and find a lake, or a pond really, it's more of a pond. So this is a cliff face that I very foolishly climbed up the side of when I was a boy. I don't know when it stops being bouldering and becomes free soloing. Either way, it was very silly and I couldn't imagine doing it now. While that's bubbling away, got my beans ready. May as well answer another short question. Another common one is, how long should a zone 2 training session be? Again, it depends. If you're just starting out, then 30 to 45 minutes is a great place to start. Down my beans a minute. Oh shit, nearly lost them. That would have been absolutely tragic. Yeah, you could then build up to an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I don't think there's necessarily much benefit past 90 minutes for the average person. But then it depends on your goals. So if you're looking to run a longer race, like a half marathon or a marathon, you would likely then progress onto a kind of a marathon specific training program after building your base with the zone 2 training. Cycling is typically a bit lower impact, so you can manage longer time in the saddle. So you might spend anywhere between an hour and kind of all day rides depending on your experience and what you're looking to get out of it. Time for me to eat. Living the dream. Burnt my mouth on my beans, inevitably. So while I wait for them to cool down, let's do another question. So how many sessions per week should we do the zone 2? Again, it depends on your goals, it depends on your starting place, it depends where you're looking to head and the amount of stress in your life. If you're just starting out, then 2 sessions a week might be good for you, maybe 3 if that's kind of your main training. If you're a bit more serious about kind of endurance training and that's like pretty much all you're going to be doing, then maybe 3 or 4 times a week. But saying that, I have a good friend who was training once a week, sometimes not even that. He did that for a block of 3 or 4 months, didn't really change much else, and he made significant improvements in his per kilometer time over that time period, and he also set a PB with his 5k time by, I think, more than a minute. So that's quite cool to kind of demonstrate that you don't need to have a huge training volume or a huge training intensity placing loads of stress on your body to make improvements. And not just improvements in his aerobic capacity in kind of his zone 2 runs, but also improvements in a more glycolytic high intensity activity like a 5k, which he was pushing it close to the max. His heart rate was up in the 180s 190s for kind of the 20 minutes that he was doing it. So yeah, you don't have to, it'd be silly for me to give you a number. Like it's really personalized, and you can make progress potentially by doing very little. I'm similar, I haven't made as drastic improvements in as my friend, but I'm training once or twice a week. I'm seeing steady improvements and I'm not stressing my body out to the max like I used to with a whole load of high intensity training. So yeah, test it out and maybe try and find what the minimum effective dose is for you. If it's 1 session a week, then that's amazing. It might be 1 every couple of weeks or 2 a week. Just test it out, find what works for you. There's no one size fits all approach with anything really. Beans around my chops. It's a shame to see all this litter all littered around. That mentality where you can just kind of chuck something and just kind of leave it. It's quite frustrating. And I suppose I should have brought a bag to pick some stuff up. My dad does that sometimes. I'll have to remember to do that next time. Otherwise, I suppose I'm just as much part of the problem if I'm not doing something about it. I'm just whinging about it. Yeah, it is a shame. Next time I'll bring my bag, pick it all up, or as much as I can. GoPro's gone a bit dodgy, so I'm back to the Panasonic for a bit. I finished lunch and I'm going to head up over the top of the mountain now, which is a pretty steep climb. Should be fun. I haven't done that for a while, so might not be very zone 2-ish, probably more like zone 6. But yeah, head over there to the lake. It's more of a pond, but yeah, should be quite nice. And I will answer some more questions on the way. Give me an excuse to stop and catch my breath. Ooh. Something about eating outside that I love. That was one of the nicest meals I've had in a little while. I eat well at home, but that was just simple and nice to be sat here. Just no real distractions. That's kind of the view. Yeah, the birds up in the tree. Just nice and peaceful and simple. Simple like me. Up and over this way is the mission. Do the pylon on top. Sitting in the tree, try not to fall out. Another common question is, how do you perform zone 2 training if you don't have a heart rate monitor, or you don't really want to be kind of a slave to technology and have to be constantly looking at your Garmin or whatever. So yeah, typically you would use a Garmin, a Fitbit, that sort of thing to keep track of your heart rate. You can use their built-in heart rate zones, or you can use the MAF formula developed by Phil Maffetone to kind of calculate your MAF heart rate, which kind of corresponds with zone 2 training, which is 180 minus your age and then adjusted for a few other factors. You might not have access to a heart rate monitor, you might not want to use one, I completely understand that. It's important to note that these training zones are somewhat arbitrary. It's not like being in zone 2 you're purely aerobic, it's that your aerobic energy system is contributing kind of at the highest percentage. You're still going to be somewhat anaerobic. All of our energy systems, our 3 energy systems, are contributing to regenerating ATP, which is our energy currency in the body. They're all contributing kind of at the same time, but just at different degrees. So yeah, zone 2 isn't like this magical zone. It's just where you're primarily working aerobically, using fat as a fuel. Yeah, primarily aerobic, but it's not a perfect science. So there are a few things to look for if you're looking to perform zone 2 low intensity aerobic training without a heart rate monitor. One is, can you hold a conversation at that pace? Like an easy conversation with a friend without having to take kind of labored breaths, like, oh, I nearly choked on my own breath then. It should be a comfortable pace. So yeah, if you're with a friend, obviously you can have a chat with them. If it's getting too kind of difficult for you to maintain a conversation, then you probably need to slow down. If you're out on your own, you could talk to yourself or sing a song now and again and just measure it that way. The second thing would be your breathing. I would say that for most people, if you cannot breathe nasally, so in and out through your nose while you are running, you're probably not in zone 2. If you're having that thirst for air and you're having to gasp, you're probably crossing more into that predominantly anaerobic system, probably pushing it too high of an intensity for this specific type of training. Third thing would be your form. So typically at a zone 2 pace, that's where your form is going to feel light and easy. It's actually one of the ways that Phil Maffetone actually originally judged whether his athletes were kind of in the zone 2 or training at the MAF heart rate, was observing their form. He saw that their form would typically break down when they passed that threshold out of kind of predominantly the aerobic energy system. This can sometimes be a bit tricky if you're kind of new to running, you're not kind of sure what a comfortable, maybe it just doesn't feel comfortable at all. And sometimes I find that going at a faster pace, I'm doing something other than zone 2 training, I can get into a bit more of a rhythm, and it feels more comfortable sometimes than my zone 2 runs. So it can be a little bit tricky. Generally, it should feel a comfortable pace that you could go all day. So you finish your run feeling relatively fresh, and as if you could go out and do another run, or yeah, just keep going. So you're looking for conversational pace, nasal breathing, and a relaxed, comfortable form. And if you keep track of those 3 things, then you're more than likely going to be in or around that zone 2 heart rate. So that might save you forking out on an expensive heart rate monitor or smartwatch or whatever. This bit is heavy going. Yeah. It must be a slightly dried out stream. Yeah, we've had a lot of rain the last few days. Whoa. So it's starting to become streamy again. That was a fall. Good fun. Even on these really like off-piste bits, there's plastic, there's rubbish. Can't escape it. Onwards and upwards. On that last point as well, it's important to consider that heart rate monitor is not always the most accurate. I've got a watch that is considered to be one of the one of the more respected brands, and like I'm huffing getting up that steep hill, and it's saying that my heart rate is kind of no zone 70, 69. I know it's up in the 140s, 150s. I know I've gone out of zone 2. That's an airplane. So regardless of whether you are using a heart rate monitor or not, it's important not to just go by what the numbers are saying on your wrist. Ideally, we want to be able to become more in tune with our bodies and know where we stand and what intensity we're pushing it based on just how we feel, using the torque test, breathing, form, that sort of stuff. The heart rate monitor is just there as a tool for you to kind of measure how you're feeling against what the numbers are saying. So yeah, we don't want to just be a complete slave to the heart rate monitor. We don't want to take what technology is saying just as gospel. The difference between MAF, zone 2, steady state aerobic training, ultimately they're largely the same thing. There are differences. Well, zone 2 is typically refers to one of 6 heart rate zones. So it can be calculated any number of ways, using your lactate threshold, your maximum heart rate reserve. So there are numerous ways to calculate it. Then Phil Maffetone has his MAF method, which is calculated using his formula. Then steady state or aerobic training simply refers to going out and running, cycling, swimming for a prolonged time period, which would typically be ideally in your zone 2 or MAF heart rate. So there's slight differences between them all, but ultimately the goal is to be working low intensity, low-ish heart rate aerobic, improving your aerobic capacity, your ability to work for a prolonged time period, and supporting your cardiovascular health and performance. So whilst there are differences, I kind of lump them in together and I refer to them interchangeably, which may or may not be best practice, but it kind of keeps things simple. So yeah, we're working at low intensity, lowish heart rate, conversational pace, and yeah, there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. Oh, let's keep going. Found a shovel. A bit ominous. So another common question, should you only perform zone 2 training? It's a really good question. It's a common misconception that zone 2 training should be everything that you do. That's definitely not what I'm suggesting. If you are just starting out with running or endurance training, or you are kind of like an amateur hobbyist and you don't have, big aspirations of winning competitions or anything like that, you don't have a season per se, then taking some time out to perform 3, 6, maybe even 9 months of mainly zone 2 work is probably a good idea to help build your base. Just like if you were just getting started with strength training, you would begin with the basics. You would spend a good chunk of time working on basic compound movements before jumping in with anything complicated like Olympic lifting or plyometrics or anything like that. Similarly with endurance training, it's slightly different in terms of kind of the mechanisms, or very different, but the same principle kind of applies. Build the basics, and the more time you spend building the basics, the better it's going to serve you in the future. It's the same thing in martial arts. You don't start learning kind of rubber guard and X guard and 50-50, all the complicated jiu-jitsu stuff. For the most part, you don't necessarily need it, and if you're going to learn it, it's probably going to be more around purple, brown, black belt. If you're just starting out as a white belt, you drill the basics, you get very proficient at them, and that's what is going to enable you to progress and become a stronger grappler and a stronger endurance machine. So in this initial base building period, 3, 6, 9 months, I would focus on predominantly zone 2 training a few times a week, and then support that with some basic strength work and mobility work as well, so you kind of get that complete triangle. That being said, if you are an athlete who is looking to compete, or you already compete in a sport or activity that is more explosive, and you can't necessarily take that time out, you're obviously still going to have to perform your high intensity training. It's up to you and your coach to kind of figure out what that balance looks like for you. So for the average person looking to generally be fit and still have some explosiveness and strength, I like Matt Fitzgerald's approach of the kind of 80-20 balance between aerobic and high intensity training. So the 80 being kind of your low intensity work. So you'd maybe move on to that after an initial period of base building. So you're not jumping in with Tabatas and high intensity interval training right away. Interestingly, this 80-20 balance has also been used by some elite marathon runners, Paula Radcliffe. The idea is you're going to get more out of your high intensity training by spending most of your time low intensity aerobic. So for higher intensity athletes, then that ratio is going to adjust accordingly. So an MMA fighter, they might be kind of 80-20, 70-30 outside of a training camp, but then during camp and leading up to a fight, that ratio is going to change depending on the athlete, depending on their style and their strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, generally would dedicate some time to pure aerobic work to get the most bang for your buck. You can kind of do some concurrent training with strength training. I would ease off the really high intensity stuff if you are completely new, and then kind of move towards an 80-20 approach if you want to introduce any high intensity training at some point. So 80% of it low intensity zone 2 MAF, 20% of it more high pace, the stuff that's a bit more of a stress on your body and is harder to recover from. Again, I don't have all the answers. That is just my opinion, and you can do with it whatever you wish. I gotta carry on up this mountain. That's a pretty cool view. So we are up on top, a little bit windier up here, a bit more barren, a lot more cow shit too. I'm going to abandon the pond/lake idea and head back down into the forest, because there is a big black cloud over that way, some rain coming in, and my batteries are starting to drain, both technologically and physically. So I'm going to head back down and just kind of enjoy the rest of the hike with my new shovel. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful. I hope it answered some of the questions you might have about Zone 2 training. I enjoyed making it. I much prefer making videos this way. You can let me know down below what you think, but yeah, it's nice just to have a bit of an adventure as well and just go out and explore. It's something I've always loved doing, something I want to do a lot more of, both in my personal life but also with this channel as well. I love making these sort of videos where I'm just out and about having fun and messing around. I suppose during lockdown and kind of the current situation, I think what a lot of people are realizing is that adventure doesn't necessarily have to be this thing that's in a faraway place that you have to get on a plane to go and do. I'm very lucky that this is 5-10 minutes away from my house. Yeah, hopefully somewhere near you, if you can get a little bit creative, there's a chance to have a bit of an adventure and kind of get a little bit lost in nature, and disconnect from a lot of the stress that seems to be quite abundant in the media, and just because of the whole situation at the moment. Yeah, I'd encourage you to get out there, explore, and take some of your training outside when you can, and disconnect from the stress. See what adventures you can have in your backyard. I have to have a snooze before I go back down. Wait a snack. That's a good combo. So down over there is kind of where I live. Back over that way is sort of where I was born. A history lesson of me. And there's some sheep. Can you do Zone 2 training with barefoot running? Yes you can. In fact, it's they kind of go hand in hand, particularly if you've been running for a while and you're looking to transition to more barefoot, like fully barefoot or minimalist shoes. If you're Zone 2 training, you're going to be slowing down. You're going to be moving at a slower pace than you usually are. So it is a good time to kind of try out more minimalist shoes and kind of get your body used to it, rather than jumping in at your usual pace and kind of expecting to maintain that pace. So yeah, Zone 2 training, barefoot running and nasal breathing, I think they're a good triple threat combo to experiment with, and they really play off each other quite nicely. Going barefoot, going minimalist, you kind of want to ease into it. You don't want to overdo it. You want to tread lightly and really work on your form. So putting in the miles with slow and steady Zone 2 training, yeah, I really like it. I think they work well together. Some great mountain bike tracks up here. Actually came down this stretch not long ago with my dad on the bikes, and he was ahead. I came around the corner and found he'd fallen off, and his bike at least was in a double pile of cow shit, which was quite funny. Like said, incident was right about by here. Evidence still remains. Hope you enjoyed this video. Didn't want to just make a video about running. I wanted to have a little bit of fun with it too and have a bit of an adventure. So yeah, it's fun having to be kind of creative with making the videos as well, to a degree. And it's something I'm still learning about, obviously, but like just having to use what nature provides, and like use rocks and sticks as a tripod. Yeah, it forces you to get creative, and I really enjoy it. I've got a few slightly bigger adventures planned for the near future, health dependent and COVID situation dependent as well, to a degree. Yeah, feel free to subscribe to the channel and get updates when they are available. I'll document them and share them. Catch you soon.